The Sony RX0. Now, I've read a lot of comments online, I've watched a lot of YouTube videos, and I just think that a lot of people are looking at this camera the wrong way.
No 4K internally. Now even the phone can take 4K. Even my fridge takes 4K video. Even my cat takes 4K video. Two lenses, 3D actually.
The RX0, it's not a direct competitor with the GoPro Hero 6. All those people moaning about the RX0 specification and saying the GoPro's better should go and check out this. It's the Sony X3000. This is Sony's action camera, and this is the camera that's going to go head to head with the GoPro Hero 6, at least until the next one comes out. In the whole camera market, this little RX0 kind of sits on its own. And I'm not saying that the RX0 is perfect, far from it, but let's talk a little bit about what it can, and more importantly, what it can't do. So here it is, the RX0, a tiny little camera that should offer the kind of same functionality and image quality as the highly praised RX100 Mark V, just in this smaller, waterproof, dustproof, crush-proof body. Now, much of the comparison between the RX100 Mark V and the RX0 comes from the fact that they use the same, or at least a very similar 1-inch size 20 million pixel stacked CMOS sensor. But there are differences in how this sensor is used. So the RX0 here only outputs 15 million pixel images from that 21 million pixel sensor. Now, quite why it does this isn't entirely known. It could be something to do with processing, it could be something to do with heat. But in this case, I think it's more likely that the imaging circle from this tiny Zeiss 24mm f4 equivalent Tessar T-Star lens doesn't quite cover that full 1-inch size of the sensor.
Oh, size lens, big deal. Oh, my Sony Ericsson from 2001 got a size lens.
But in truth, the fact that it only shoots 15 million pixel images is not a problem. In detail resolution terms, the difference between 15 million pixels and 20 million pixels is only very slight. And let's face it, most people are going to be buying the RX0 to shoot video rather than still images.
Oh yeah, you put a size lens in it, and then you put a glass in front of it. Oh, that's a good idea.
The lens itself is another point of difference between the RX0 and what we think of as a more traditional action camera. Now, 24mm equivalent isn't particularly wide. As a comparison, the GoPro Hero 6 has a 14mm equivalent lens. However, on the flip side, this means that the RX0 has virtually no curvilinear distortion. This makes it much more suitable as a little B camera for fitting into those tight spaces without having that noticeable warpy fisheye effect. When I first saw that still image resolution, I assumed that the reason that it was only using 15 million pixels rather than the full 21 million pixels of the sensor was going to allow for some kind of electronic image stabilization. But the RX0 has no stabilization, no optical, sensor shift, digital, there's no stabilization on it.
No stabilizer? What is this, 2010?
Now, this is where the RX0 has received a lot of criticism, and in my opinion it does feel like a little bit of an oversight not to have included at least something. Like I say, electronic could have been perfect. Now, I did some shooting with the RX0 when I was in Japan, and I used it completely handheld, and the footage looks kind of like you would expect it to. Walking with the camera is kind of a no-go. The footage is wobbly, a bit shaky, and every single step is noticeable. Now, if you're hand holding the camera, just trying to kind of hold it steady, and you're filming a scene, trying to keep the camera still, it's not too bad, it's acceptable. Depends how still you hold the camera, and obviously you can tweak it a little bit in post-production. Now, a gimbal is the obvious solution, and anybody that's really serious about their filmmaking and wants the 1-inch sensor, they're most likely going to be using some form of stabilization anyway, even on a GoPro or something like that. So yes, I do think they have missed a little opportunity here not to include some kind of stabilization in the RX0, but only because that would have appealed a lot more to consumers, and potentially they would have had a few more sales out of it. But the RX0 is a tiny camera that's crying out to be mounted to things, so it's not going to be a deal breaker for most professionals. No doubt there are companies already working on dedicated 3-axis gimbals specifically for this camera. And so on to the next major talking point, the lack of internal 4K recording.
Even my cat take 4K video.
But first, let's talk a little bit about what it can do. In PAL mode, the RX0 will shoot XAVC footage at 1080p at 25, 50 or 150 frames per second with a data rate of 50 megabits per second. Now, just like the other recent RX series cameras, the RX0 can also shoot that super slow motion footage at 250, 500 or 1000 frames per second. 1000 frames per second in this little camera. Now, that high frame rate footage is actually saved as full HD, but it has been upscaled. So for example, in the maximum 1000 frames a second, when you're in the shooting time priority mode, the footage is actually upscaled from 800 by 270 pixels. It's quite low resolution footage it's upscaling it from. Now, switch that to 250 frames per second and shoot in the quality mode. The footage is upscaled from a much more respectable 1676 by 942 pixels, which is obviously a lot closer to full HD resolution. And the footage at that 250 frames a second actually looks pretty good. Now, there's a ton of other features for filmmakers who want to make use of the RX0. Most noticeable is the fact that it has the Sony picture profile settings on it, including the option to shoot S-Log2 color gamma. It's got zebra patterning, it's got focus peaking. The only thing missing is that ability to record 4K internally.
My cat 4K video.
Now, the camera does have the ability to record 4K footage via its micro HDMI output. However, it's unlikely you're going to be wanting to mount an Atomos Shogun whilst you're mountain biking, water skiing, skydiving, filming underwater. Now, for all that mounting and rigging up you may want to do with the RX0, there is a specifically built cage for this, but as you would expect from Sony, it costs £280. Now, with the cage fitted, it offers you somewhere to mount a microphone, an external monitor, or an LED light, and you can make them full use of obviously the HDMI output and the microphone socket that's on the back of the camera here. So the RX0 has some great video features, but the lack of 4K and the lack of stabilization, it is going to put off some more casual users who want an action camera to walk around for everyday use. However, things like scuba diving, maybe skydiving, in-car shots, or even adding just a small discrete camera behind something on a film set, the RX0 has that covered, especially with that large sensor and those kind of additional features that filmmakers want. So those things are the key talking points about the RX0, but let's talk a little bit more about how this operates. Now, in terms of handling, it's obviously quite limited. It's a small metal-bodied camera. There's a door on the bottom for the battery compartment, and there's a cover just on the back that reveals the micro HDMI, micro USB, micro SD, and of course the microphone socket. Now, on top of the camera, simple power button and a start stop record button. Now, that start stop record also acts as the shutter button if you're going to be taking pictures. Now, on the rear, surrounding the tiny 1.5-inch screen, there are just 6 buttons. We've got 4 directional controls, then there's a menu button, and then there's the select button. Now, the on-screen menu itself, it's about as comprehensive as the menu system on the RX100V. It's incredible that they've packed all of these features into this tiny little camera. The buttons and controls, you can do a pretty good job of navigating the menu. It can be a little bit fiddly, but it's the kind of camera that once you've got it set up, it's rare that you're going to go in and change a lot of settings. Now, to speed things up, I recommended Sony that they put a little dial on here somewhere that just will allow you to quickly flick through some of those settings. Now, when you're actually shooting itself, the right directional button doubles up as a function button, and it pulls up that quick menu that we're used to seeing on the RX series cameras and on the Sony A7 series cameras. Now, one of the more complex things to get your head around is the contrast detection autofocus system. Now, exactly what you can and can't focus on depends exactly on what mode you're in. So in still image mode, it has got contrast detection AF. You can choose sort of wide or center points and it will automatically pick something out. Or alternatively, it's actually got a tracking mode, so it will lock onto your subject, follow it around, and when you press the shutter button down, it will lock onto that subject, focus on it and take the picture. But it's not continuous AF. The camera actually has no continuous AF at all. Now, when you're shooting a video, there are two options. You can use a manual focus, which just displays a kind of focus range on the bottom. Now you've got the options here using the directional controls when you're in the manual focus mode to jump between some preset distances, or you can simply tap again and again and again, or hold your finger down to just shift that focus point. Now, when you're in that manual focus mode, you also have an 8x pull up on the screen at the back, which enables you to really fine tune and precisely get that focus. By far the better option, in my opinion, for when you're shooting video is the preset mode. Now, when you're in this mode, it's simply choosing whether you want to focus near or far. So near has a focus plane of 50 centimeters to 1 meter. So rear has a focus plane of 50 centimeters to 1 meter, whereas the far is kind of 1 meter to infinity. Now, because of the 1-inch sensor and the f4 aperture, you've got plenty of depth of field here to play with. So for the majority of time, you can just set it up on the standard mode on that preset, and you can just point. If you want to get a bit closer to something, you simply press the selection button on the back, quickly flips something in the lens here, and it enables you to get between 50 centimeters and 1 meter for when you're getting closer. Pretty neat system. And again, given the f4 aperture, which is fixed, and the depth of field, you don't have to worry too much about focusing with this camera at all. So a couple of things that are missing. You've got no Playmemories mobile apps, although you can obviously connect the camera via Wi-Fi to a mobile phone or a tablet. And again, you've got a tiny bit of lag, but once you've got it set up the first time, it's pretty simple to do, and you can obviously use the camera remotely. One oversight I have noticed is there's no time-lapse option. This thing is perfect for time-lapses, for rigging up somewhere, maybe putting it in a waterproof cage, putting it in a waterproof box with a battery, and you can just leave it and shoot for hours. Seems like a little bit of an oversight. I really hope that Sony are going to be able to add that via firmware, because this camera is just ideal for time-lapse. So the RX0 then, it's clearly not aimed at that action camera market that's going to compete with Sony's own X3000 and the GoPro Hero 5. It's higher end than that. It's more for professional, semi-professional enthusiast use who want to get, you know, that best kind of quality and dynamic range from a tiny little camera. And this is small. This is about the same size as the GoPro Hero 6. Now, we're going to be doing some more with this camera, so if this is your first time watching and you haven't subscribed, make sure you like PGN, hit the subscribe button there so you can watch our videos. We try and get around 2 to 3 videos out every single week, and here is another video that YouTube's algorithm has picked for you to watch next. See you next time.